session. Please feel free to find us. We're all in Interfaith shirts, but if you are a current board member, if you can just please stand up for a minute so people know who you are. Great, so find any of our board members if you have questions. Okay, there are a couple of ways you can become involved with the Interfaith Council. The first thing is placing membership. The membership fees are what helps us bring speakers and events into town. We have 3 different levels of memberships. We have a $12 membership for students. We have a $25 general membership and then a $50 membership for congregations or organizations that want to join the Interfaith Council. Once you're a member, we also have different committees that we're recruiting for. So we have an advertising committee, a fundraising committee, and a membership and recruitment committee. So if you're more interested in getting involved with us, we have amazing committee chairs from our board members that would love to work with you throughout this year to really broaden our horizon, broaden our membership, broaden our impact into the community. We have a very busy year planned. We have our monthly events. We have cafe conversations. We have book readings at Art Walks. We're going to do some fundraising dinners at different restaurants in town. So if you go to the back of the room, there's some information you can find, including calendars. You can put on your refrigerator or flyers with our upcoming events. So please feel free to grab any of our material and stay connected with us on Facebook or through our email distribution list. Before we start tonight's event, I'm sorry, my voice is giving out a bit today. I want to recognize our sponsors. So First Presbyterian has made it possible for us to bring JD Stillwater to Abilene through Zoom today. I want to thank McMurray University and our former board member, Dr. Mark Waters, for hosting us on the McMurray campus. And then also recognize the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Abilene, a congregation or a denomination that JD Stillwater is very involved with as well. And with that, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker for tonight. Very excited to have him join us via Teams, actually. But JD Stillwater is a graduate of Cornell University. He is a science ambassador and author who writes and speaks about profound insights from the natural reality and insights that he believes can drive paradigm shifts and cultural awakening. The work springs from JD's love of science and his gift for making difficult concepts graspable for non-scientists. And I will say, as a non-scientist, I really appreciate that. He had a 24-year teaching career, teaching secondary education, and now shares the awe, wonder, and spiritual depth of he experiences from the findings of the global scientific endeavor. JD is an officer of the Religious Naturalist Association. He is a global community of people. It's a global community of people who take nature to heart. He also serves on the governing council of the Institute on Religion in an Age of Science, and he is a trustee of the Renner Foundation. In his private life, JD is married to his supportive wife, Anne. They've been married since 1987, so congratulations on that. And they have 2 grown children who are now pursuing their own passions. JD is an accomplished musician, and he performs here and there, but mostly at his Unitarian Universalist church. In his spare time, he has many interests. Let me see if I can get them all right. He enjoys hiking, dancing with Anne, poetry, drum circles, travel, a good belly laugh, managing money, building and fixing things, technology, making kettle corn, connecting people, couch surfing to lessen the footprint of travel, and reading science magazines. I'm not sure how he gets all these things in and fits them all into 24 hours a day, but very impressed. We're very happy to welcome JD Stillwater into our Abilene community today. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, JD.
Thank you, Susanna. I am so glad to be here. Give me just a minute. I'm going to share my screen. This is slightly unfamiliar because we're using Teams. I want to make sure I get the right window. Okay. Can you see my screen? Okay. As I said, I'm really glad to be here, and I'd love to be there in person, and I hope that can happen sometime in the next year or two. And I understand that Abilene is the proud host city for the National Center for Children's Illustrated Literature. So when I come there in person, which I hope is going to happen, I'm going to have to give them a copy of my children's book. I am honored tonight to be part of the good work of the Abilene Interfaith Council because I think it's really important. This work of reaching across theological and scriptural divides. But what if there were no scriptural divides? Or, in other words, what if there were a common scripture that was shared by all religions? Sounds kind of far-fetched, right? Well, stay with me. The dictionary definition of scripture is really short. Religious writings regarded as holy or sacred. You know, a funny thing happened the other day. My coworker brought a CD version of the Holy Scripture to work, and he got upset when I asked if I could burn a copy of it. You know, there's nothing like a good joke, and that was nothing like a good joke. But it brings up an important point about what we mean by a holy scripture or a sacred text. Pagan priestess Starhawk once wrote that something is sacred when there is no end, no goal that can justify its destruction or its desecration. Well, that suggests that sacred texts describe things or ideas that must be protected, revered, cherished. Well, last summer, I learned about a podcast called Harry Potter and the Sacred Text. This Harvard divinity student named Vanessa Zoltan began reading the classic fiction book Jane Eyre as though it were a sacred scripture, studying it just to see what spiritual meaning she might be able to glean from it. And she and her professor were astounded at how beneficial that was. And so the effort grew into a study group. And then at some point, someone suggested they use books people actually like. So they started studying the Harry Potter books as though they were sacred texts. It grew into a podcast. And now, 9 years later, 16 million people have benefited spiritually from studying the Harry Potter books as though they were scripture. And that's in spite of J.K. Rowling's dismaying transphobia and anti-Semitism. Their point is not that Harry Potter is a sacred text. It isn't. They chose it because it's well known and people like to read it. And there's a lot going on in the story's plot. Now, I mention all this because I think if this can work with Harry Potter, of all things, I think it could work with almost any text. And what they're doing in this project is exegesis, which means interpretation of a text, usually sacred texts. And Vanessa and her team say, in big bold type on their website, we believe that in treating texts as sacred, we can learn to treat one another as sacred. And they emphasize that this works with Harry Potter, remember, it works because of three things: trust, rigor, and community. Trust that the text can yield generous rewards. Rigor, well, here's how they put it. They say the text in and of itself is not sacred, but is made so through our rigorous engagement with it. And then community, in that it takes a village to be uplifted together, to make holy meaningfulness from a text studied in community. If millions of people can extract spiritual enrichment from studying the Harry Potter books, then if we had a global text that we regarded as sacred, what miracles could arise from interfaith study of it? Especially if we studied it with trust, rigor, and community. I think the world might be very different. If we had a common scripture, different people would probably make different meanings from it. And that's okay. As you know, the billions of people who study the Hebrew book of Genesis have all kinds of different takes on the role of women, for example. All right, one more joke. What did God say after creating Adam? She said, I can do better than that. But what's not funny is how some in this country's history use Genesis to justify slavery. Some people still think that way. And clearly, the same text can sometimes yield vastly different interpretations. So a common scripture doesn't necessarily prevent misuse of it or guarantee religious reconciliation, but it might help. At the very least, we could have some shared holidays, and we would have a common language for addressing challenges, from personal challenges to global crises. Now, at heart, religious scriptures are about spiritual experience. So take a moment to just remember a time when you felt profoundly spiritually inspired or totally at peace or deeply connected. Take a few deep breaths and put yourself back there. Remember where you were and how you felt. And when you're ready, take about a minute or two to just share briefly with someone sitting near you about the context of that experience. I'll keep track of the time. Just share briefly with the people around you about one of your strong spiritual experiences. I feel like we should have Jeopardy music or something in the background here. Go ahead and wrap up. Take another few seconds and wrap up. Thank you. It looks like most of you are done. Well, when I ask people to share about their spiritual experiences, almost always they describe something that happened in a natural setting, or they describe an experience that was deeply connective, or often both connective experience in nature. Well, here's the big reveal. As soon as I can get my slides to work again. We do have a common global scripture, and you and I have been living and worshiping in its pages our whole lives, perhaps never even considering its spiritual potential, its sacred depths, if you will. It is tremendously rich in theological content. We might disagree about the divine provenance of one another's traditional scriptures, but this one we know to have been directly, personally written by the Creator, however we perceive and name that ultimate source. Our common scripture is nature, creation, natural physical reality, a vast cosmos that we now know to be at least 47 billion light years across, a universe that includes all of us here on Earth, along with uncountable other Earths. Did you know that there are more solar systems in the visible universe than there are grains of sand on Earth? Let that sink in for a second. There are more solar systems in the universe than there are grains of sand on the Earth. So imagine if your own holy scripture, whatever that is, imagine if it contained a sentence like this: the sun is a fire bigger than a million Earths, and there are more suns in the heavens than grains of sand on Earth. What meaning would you make of that as you studied it? How does it feel to contemplate that? Does it expand your feelings about who or what could have created such a cosmos? Now imagine that that sentence isn't just a sentence in a book recorded by a revered prophet long ago. but a present-day reality you can see with your own eyes. Imagine that anyone can see it and engage with you about what it means to them, how they feel knowing this. How do you feel knowing this? When I ask people that, some say it makes them feel really small, really insignificant. Well, we are. Astronomer Neil deGrasse Tyson says we are a speck on a speck on a speck on a speck. Really, really small. One of those pictures, this one, is a photograph of Earth taken by Voyager 1 from beyond the orbit of Neptune. Your entire life, all of human history, all of evolution took place on that tiny dot. Carl Sagan described it as a pale blue dot suspended in a sunbeam. A speck. On the other hand, as far as we know, the only complex life in the entire universe is here on Earth. 2 trillion galaxies of stars, and this tiny dot of a planet may have the only eyes, the only hearts, the only love, the only minds to appreciate it all. So, are you a speck, or are you precious beyond measure? Science just describes, and in that regard, it's a text. It doesn't tell us what it means, doesn't tell us what to make of it. Science concerns itself with what is. It's up to each of us to determine what it means. And human beings are hardwired for making meaning. We can't avoid it. We think in metaphors and analogies. When we're doing science, it's crucial that we hew as closely as possible to the raw facts. And it's really important that we don't confuse our models and metaphors with reality itself. But make no mistake, meaning will be made from new knowledge, one way or another. So when scientists and science writers insist that the cosmos is devoid of meaning, well, they may be right, but at best they leave a void that will get filled with something. At worst, they encourage people to reject science altogether because our guts tell us that nothing is completely meaningless. So again, am I a mere speck or precious in thy sight? I say both. For me, being both minuscule and precious instills a kind of durable humility along with a sense of responsibility. It says, I'm not in control here, and what I do really matters. I'm a terribly small part of something incomprehensibly vast, and nevertheless, I'm an essential part. In 2017, I was fortunate to travel to Oregon's Central Desert with a group of students to see the Great American Eclipse. And I knew it would be a cool astronomical event, but honestly, I had no idea. The experience was ineffable, and my attempts to describe it always fall short, but I'm going to try again. There was a feeling of excitement when the moon made first contact with the sun's disk and then slowly began devouring it. It happened slowly over about an hour, time we spent just brimming with anticipation. Gradually, the light around us dimmed, not suddenly or obviously, but the whole world began to look thin, papery, almost kind of two-dimensional. And then it was dark. Not midnight dark. The horizon looked like early dawn, but that was all around us, not just in the east. Stars twinkled clear and bright overhead. Tendrils of misty light streamed out from the ominous black disk where the sun should have been and was just moments before. I was intensely aware that that misty light I was seeing from the sun's corona traced a laser straight line of conscious connection from my eye up through the atmosphere, just skimming the edge of the moon and reaching out all the way to the sun, drawing me into their primordial dance, a dance that conjoins space and time and that marries dynamism with stillness and connects descendants with ancestors. But these were not thoughts in my head. I felt all of that all at once. It washed over me like a cool shower on a hot afternoon. It was overwhelming, breathtaking. It was beautiful. And then it was over. Those 2 minutes of totality were painfully short. I exhaled and discovered that I was sobbing with joy and awe. If you get a chance to see a total solar eclipse, take it. For me, it was a profound spiritual experience. Well, Richard Louv says all spiritual life begins with a sense of wonder. And I've spent many years now collecting and cataloging awe-inspiring wonders from natural reality. I've been calling them revelations because they get revealed as scientists do their work. And even if we had 1,000 hours this evening, I could barely scratch the surface of all the ones I've collected. But I want to share a few more. Let's start. I'm going to ask you to bring to mind a prophet or a teacher at the root of your faith tradition, whatever that is. Someone maybe like Moses or Baha'u'llah or Jesus or Buddha, somebody like that. Take a second. Everybody have someone in mind? All right, now take a deep breath with me. You just breathed in over 13 sextillion air molecules in each breath. But here's the thing. Over 700 million of those molecules were also at some point inside the lungs of the prophet or teacher you were thinking of. The same is true of everyone who lived more than a few decades ago. That same breath also included some air molecules from every animal that ever lived, every plant that ever lived. They are all right here in the atmosphere of these rooms with us. And knowing all that, now take another breath. Feels a little different, doesn't it? Some of the oxygen molecules you breathed in a moment ago now are you. They've become part of your body. They've come alive by being part of you. There are more solar systems in the universe than grains of sand on Earth. And there are more water molecules in 1 tablespoon of water than all the stars and sand grains combined. Air and water molecules are so small and so numerous, and they cycle around the Earth so constantly that every cup of beverage you swallow contains over 150 million water molecules that actually passed through Jesus' body during his lifetime. If your religious founder lived more than about 35 years old, then it's even more than 150 million in every cup of every beverage you'll ever drink. That's the science. Now, what does it mean? Well, to me, among other things, it means that all water is holy water. And when I consider that as I drink, it connects me with all the ancestors on this dynamic living planet and with the holiness that infuses every moment I'm alive. It orients me squarely within a stream of flowing matter and energy far greater than myself, far greater than my daily struggles. So when I meditate on science revelations like this, and then interpret them like the chapters of a religious text, some consistent fibers stand out for me, like golden threads in nature's tapestry. I begin to see patterns that have meaning, not only for me personally, but that offer to help heal a wounded society on a critically ill planet. And I call them the insights, and I want to skim through just 3 of them. First, let me say that what I'm about to share is partly science and partly exegesis. It's interpretive meaning making from the findings of science. Somebody else might look at the same science knowledge and interpret it very differently. Here we go. Unity. The kind of genetic testing being done routinely now makes clear that every human being on the planet is a distant cousin. The people here this evening are all cousins. How do we greet a cousin we've never met? that turns up at a family reunion. Let's practice and really do this. It's fun. Turn to someone sitting near you there in the room who you don't already know and just say, "Hello, cousin. I'm so glad to finally meet you." Come on, you can do it. Awesome. Well done. Now, I have to say, of course, this isn't just for people who are easy to know and get along with. I'm also talking about the panhandler I ignored yesterday and the guy who cut me off on the road. People with unfamiliar ways from me and world leaders I regard as evil. Those are my cousins too. And this does not thrill me. It's not all sweetness and light. I don't like that the water I drink has been part of people who do awful things too. Revelations are not always comfortable, and that's true of most sacred scriptures, right? Discomfort is part of the spiritual journey. Our choice is to face the truth of it or to live in superficial denial. All humans are cousins. Every conflict is a family conflict. Every war is a civil war. Recognizing this has been profoundly meaningful for me personally. And this deep kinship doesn't stop with human beings. Those same genetic tests and many other lines of evidence reveal that every living thing on this planet is blood related, even the ones with nothing like blood in their bodies. And really not all that distant from my human cousins. This is my 304,325,256th cousin, 110,385,693 times removed. Her name, by the way, is Olivia. She has a successful career in the recycling industry, and she's always been kind to me. Well, she's celebrating because she found the perfect ball of feces to raise her children in. And I can't wait to meet my new baby cousins. The tree of life is a family tree, and there are branches on it for every living thing on this planet. And, this is not just someone's conjecture. There is overwhelming evidence that this is a fact, and we can map out precise relationships based on the genetic code. We humans are neither the root nor the apex of the tree. We are just one leaflet on one small branch. That's the science. Now, what meaning are we going to make from it? How will we treat our kin? And it's not just living things either. Here on Earth, the atmosphere, the hydrosphere, and the lithosphere are all interconnected systems, and we live on and inside them. They flow through us. Rocks dissolve in water and get washed to the ocean, then become seashells, then bird bones or rocks again. River becomes ocean, then cloud, then apple, then human, then air, everything, everywhere, all at once, up and down, across and around with interconnections and shortcuts and cycles within cycles. Here on Earth, all boundaries and distinctions are either arbitrary or temporary. Earth is one thing, not separate from us or even separable into distinct parts. One living Earth organism. Earth's matter flows through me, minute by minute, coming from elsewhere on the planet and going on to other adventures after being me. And until recently, I used the word interdependence for this, but it never felt quite adequate to me. We are not separate objects that depend on trading materials and energy with other objects. We are integral elements of a larger whole. I am the water cycle and the carbon cycle and the nitrogen cycle. Like my blood and bones are my body. They're not all of it, but they're not separable from it either. A few years ago, I learned the word interbeing as used by Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh. I think interbeing fits better for this. I'm not a distinct but interdependent object. I exist as an integral interbeing with a living planet. Interbeing extends beyond Earth, too. Every atom on Earth came from somewhere, and now we know where. All the atoms heavier than hydrogen and helium were forged inside the furnaces of exploding supernova stars. Stars make all those other elements out of hydrogen and helium. Remember, this is the origins of our bodies I'm talking about. Did you know that the main elements in your body are the same? They're in the same order of abundance as elements in the universe as a whole, except for helium and neon. They don't play well with others, and they're extremely rare on Earth. I want to show you a short clip about this.
I know that the molecules in my body are traceable to phenomenon in the cosmos. And it's our 15 pounds of gray matter that figured this out. There's a kinship with the cosmos that resonates deeply with New Age thinking, but I'm not apologetic about that. It's what we find. If whatever we find resonates with whoever, go ahead, take it. And when I reflect on our kinship with the cosmos, when I do the calculation that shows that a 15-ton meteorite that we have in the center of the Rose Center for Earth and Space, it's an iron meteorite. When I do the calculation that shows that if you take all of the iron from the hemoglobin of the people in the tri-state area of New York City, you can recover that much iron out of their blood and realize that the iron from that meteorite and the iron from your blood has common origin in the core of a star. Tell me what part of my brain is lighting up, because that excites me. That makes me want to grab people in the street and say, have you heard this?
My body is a microcosm of the cosmos. I am a reflection of the whole, acting within the whole, for the whole. Going back further, we now also know where those first atoms of hydrogen and helium came from. They came from light. Those first atoms condensed out of intense light energy at the beginning of time in a process called Big Bang nucleosynthesis. Gravity collected those atoms together to make the first stars, which later exploded to make those heavy atoms, which gravity collected again to make new stars, but also planets. Taken in context with lots of other passages from the scripture of nature, to me, this means that my family tree goes all the way back to the dawn of time, and I am interbeing with everything in the universe. We are the universe, come alive, in a state of total unity with all of it. Centuries before modern cosmological science, the Islamic poet Rumi said it this way. He said, "You are not a drop in the ocean. You are the entire ocean in a drop." Cooperation. When I was a child, my parents were Shaklee distributors, which meant that for us kids, a treat was a Shaklee energy bar. And believe me, these things are nothing like candy. Well, one day I noticed that a colony of ants had chewed a hole in the wrapper of an energy bar that had fallen unnoticed under a radiator. And to their credit, my parents treated it as a science project and let the ants eat. Well, those ants were fascinating to me, and I spent hours on my belly watching them, day after day, noticing how they walked in thin lines like highways, complete with passing lanes, and how they touched antennae with each other as they passed. Well, within about a month, the ants had carried off the entire bar, one tiny mouthful at a time. Why am I telling you this? Well, survival of the fittest does not mean survival of the strongest or fastest or smartest. The fittest means those who are best aligned with their environment. And environments change. So fittest means different things in different times and places. And in the 600 million years of life on this planet, actually it's closer to 3 billion, survival of the fittest has most often meant survival of the most cooperative. Yes, there is competition between individuals and between species, but survival is often a team sport. So cooperators almost always have an advantage. The worker ants moving that cricket are sterile. They have no chance of having baby ants of their own. They are working to support their sisters and nieces who will. Cooperation is the essence of every major advance in the complexity of life on Earth. So, in the eukaryotic revolution, single-celled bacteria engulfed but didn't digest their neighbors. To the benefit of both, those internal cooperators became essential organelles of our cells, like mitochondria and the chloroplasts in plants. Then, single cells cooperated to make the first multicellular organisms. Up until then, there were no organs, no blood, no stomachs or brains. So cooperation allows for specialization. Later, some of those multicellular creatures began to cooperate in societies like ants, but also elephants and people and wolves. The fossil record consistently reflects greater and greater scales of cooperation building up in layers of biological complexity. Living things cooperate in larger and larger assemblies. And each time that happens, new potentials, new qualities can emerge. And all of this only happens if there's diversity. No evolutionary change can happen in a population if its members are all clones of each other. When there's diversity, natural selection has something to work with, promoting alignment with the environment and hindering misalignment. Now, it's important to mention that natural selection works on populations, not individuals. This darker colored moth is just as likely to be eaten by a bat when these two moths are in the air flying. And they both could have landed on a light colored birch tree, and then the camouflage would be switched. So the lesson here is not that some individuals are better than others. It's that diverse populations have more survival options, like a football team that's proficient in more plays, or a musical group with a larger repertoire. And this is true with cultural evolution too. If we all spoke the same language, worshiped the same gods, ate the same foods, we would all be far less adaptable as the world changes around us. Diversity is a prerequisite for resilience. So, cooperation and diversity are winning strategies in evolution. That's the science. What does it mean for us today? I think interfaith efforts like the Abilene Interfaith Council are a testament to unity within diversity, cooperation across diverse perspectives. And to me, that's an expression of cosmic creativity. How fragile we would be spiritually if we all had the same beliefs and rituals, right? Religious and spiritual diversity offers our grandchildren options as they face a changing environment. And boy, are they facing a changing environment. Natural reality, as science reveals it to us, could be a source of great unity between our various faith traditions. The work of science is done by representatives from every major faith tradition on the planet, and they share their process and their conclusions globally for all humanity to take inspiration from. More than nations or religious organizations or NGOs, really more than any other human endeavor, science is people from every culture and nation and faith working together to reveal the secrets of creation. So whether you call it creation or physical reality, we meet and engage one another in this world. However, we might disagree about the nature and naming of transcendent realities, we generally agree that Earth is round, right? We agree that DNA sequences guide the development of our bodies, that microscopic pathogens cause infectious disease, that devices based on quantum effects in tiny transistors actually work. If they didn't, you wouldn't be hearing me now, right? But the culture wars urge us to think of science as some kind of enemy of religion and spirituality, claiming that science reduces all magic and mystery to the mundane mud of materialism. Well, I got to tell you, the last 150 years in science have done just the opposite. Every discovery, every dark frontier illuminated, reveals even greater mysteries beyond the shores of our knowledge. With each new revelation, nature's glory and intricacy grow, sometimes by leaps and bounds. And in me, they inspire an ever-expanding awe of the creative forces that birthed all of this. So it's tempting to say science is awesome, but it's nature that's awesome. Science just reveals it to us. Science offers revelations that could serve as a global interfaith scripture on the handiwork of ultimate source, however we perceive that. I think if the world's religions want to work together for the benefit of everyone, we might consider starting on common ground. And natural reality, physical reality, is the only literal common ground we have. And here we are, living in it, as it. What if our sources of inspiration and spirituality included one that's based on what we know alongside what we believe? It includes my beliefs while also informing them. And it's true that sometimes new discoveries make us reconsider our beliefs in a new and more expansive light. That's a spiritual practice too, right? And for me, it's had powerful implications for who I am and what's important to me. I think it could have powerful implications for others too, as well as for interfaith dialogue. For example, how does the kinship of all living things resonate, similarly or differently, for Hindus and Muslims, for Jews and Taoists, for Jains and Christians, for Mormons and pagans and atheists? What can they learn from one another once they go deeper than polite appreciation for each other's distinct beliefs and rituals? The fact of that kinship is something we all share because we are it. We are that kinship. I think it's a solid ground for supporting deep and authentic interfaith dialogue. It's one chapter of humanity's shared global scripture. When something is sacred, nothing can justify its destruction or desecration. The text in and of itself is not sacred, but is made so through our rigorous engagement with it. We believe that in treating texts as sacred, we can learn to treat one another as sacred. Nature is a sacred text, and sacred texts describe things that must be protected, revered, cherished. Approached with trust that studying nature can yield spiritual rewards, rigorous, earnest engagement to make it sacred, and to do so in community, local and global interfaith communities. Natural reality, as science reveals it to us, could be the biggest, widest, most inviting bridge between faiths ever proposed. When we treat nature as sacred, knowing that our bodies are one with the whole of creation, we might just come to treat one another as sacred too. Sacred elements of a sacred planet, minuscule and precious in a vast and glorious cosmos. Thanks for being here this evening and for supporting the Interfaith Council. If you want to stay in touch with me and my work, make a note about my website's address there on the screen, where you can subscribe to my monthly science newsletter and other fun stuff. And I'm going to stop screen sharing, and I look forward to your questions and comments and discussion.
All right. My name's Greg, and we want to move into a period of question and answering. With Interfaith Council, we want to make interfaith friendships. So we want to make sure, Angela and I are going to make sure we hear and see all of your questions. Our microphone for our recording tonight is this phone. So I'm going to bring this phone around to anybody who has a question. If you could just raise your hand. We'd love for any of your questions to be answered by JD. Any volunteers?
JD, I get to ask the first question. I did not take it well when Pluto was downgraded from a planet to a chunk of ice, and I'm just wondering what your thoughts are about that.
I am much less concerned with the way humans define things than I am with what it means for us. I mean, Pluto itself has not changed at all, right? It's the exact same thing it always was. But for reasons that are unique to astronomical categorization, it makes sense to not count it as a planet. But you are welcome to love Pluto as much as you always did. And one of the reasons, if you just want one, is that there are other Kuiper belt objects. That's how it's classified now, I think. There are other Kuiper belt objects that are bigger, that have a greater claim to being planets than Pluto does. But we don't think of them as planets because they were discovered much later. So, you know, I love Pluto too. And all the mnemonics that I learned in high school for memorizing the planets include Pluto. So there you have it.
Okay, any other questions? Over here? Okay. Well, while you're thinking, I have a question for you, JD, and I'm hoping to turn this into a question about the science of sound. My daughter and I were talking earlier this week. She's a music student. Both of my kids are music students, and we weren't talking about science at all, but we were just imagining the idea of when she plays a note on her cello. She's a cellist. If that note that she's making, has any impact in the whole universe, or does it actually touch what's happening in the whole universe, or is it just localized and limited to what we can hear or another person can hear? Is there any science to back up that idea that when my daughter plays a note on her cello, that it's making some kind of impact in another galaxy or somewhere else?
Yes, and I'm sitting here trying to think about where to even begin. There are so many reasons the answer is yes. From a metaphorical standpoint, think about a precious artwork like the Mona Lisa. If you put a tiny little X in one corner of the Mona Lisa, like the original, the only copy, have you desecrated the whole thing? Have you vandalized the whole thing, or just one little corner? The whole thing, right? So because the universe is a single event, a single happening, everything we do affects the whole thing. Now, can you measure those effects? Probably not. When your daughter draws the bow across, did you say cello, violin, whatever?
Yes, cello.
Anytime you make a sound or make any movement at all, because energy. Are you hearing a really long echo? I'm having trouble not hearing it. Any kind of change, because of the conservation of energy, it ripples out in all directions. And when it's the cello, it's the speed of sound. But lots of other changes, like actually just her arm moving to draw the bow across the strings, changes the gravitational field around your daughter's arm, because it's a massive object, a bit of mass that's moving. And those gravitational waves, teeny tiny though they are, go out through the universe, down through the earth and up through the atmosphere at the speed of light, and they continue all the way to the edge of the universe. You know, on a still day, if you go to Lake Superior and toss a pebble in, you can see the ripples going out, and you can see that they get smaller and smaller the further they go out. But those ripples will make it all the way to the other side of Lake Superior. They'll be almost impossible to measure because they'll be so small. But the laws of physics say they're going to get there. They really will. So yes, absolutely. Everything we do ripples out and affects the entire universe.
Okay, Mark has a question for us.
What you were just saying reminded me of non-locality and quantum entanglement. Would you comment on that and how that relates to the interconnectedness of the universe?
I wish I had conclusions to share with you, but that is still very much an active topic of discussion among physicists. But let's see how to do a short version of it. Entanglement is this observation that when two subatomic particles become entangled, they act like a single object that can be in two places at the same time. Or maybe they act like two different objects that can somehow communicate faster than the speed of light, that's the universal speed limit. It's supposed to be impossible, but we see it happening. So the possibility that two particles can be one object in two different places at the same time is raising this question of non-locality. And if the universe is actually non-local, that may mean that distance isn't real. Distance is an illusion, that the separation between different points in space and possibly even different points in time doesn't really exist. So it's a very active point of discussion among physicists, and I am very much watching to see how it turns out. But at this point, we don't really know. A lot of mystery, fascinating mystery being explored there. Did I answer your question, Mark, or was there more that you wanted to get to?
That was great. I mean, okay. I don't understand quantum entanglement, but that was a great response. Yeah.
Hi, how are you doing?
Good. I'm glad you're here.
Have you any opinion on the philosophy that the Earth is frozen energy and that we're living in a matrix?
Can I answer? I mean, that was two questions, and I'd like to answer them separately. Matter absolutely is frozen energy. As I just skimmed through way too fast during the presentation, at the beginning of time, there was no matter. There was only energy. And matter condensed out of energy to make the first subatomic particles that would later become atoms of hydrogen and helium. So absolutely, not just the Earth, but all the matter in the universe is frozen energy. As far as living in a matrix, there's a lot of conjecture about that. And how would you know? I guess that's the question for both scientists and philosophers to ponder. If we were living in a matrix, is there any way we could test that hypothesis? And if there isn't, then it probably doesn't matter, and it's not really a scientific question. It's more a philosophical question. But Max Tegmark and some other people who are sort of in that philosophy, mathematics, physics dialogue and realm have come up with some ways that maybe we could test that. So, for example, all the simulations that we do as humans have a pixel size, have a resolution, and you may know from your college physics classes that the Planck length, it's a tiny, tiny, tiny little, way, way, way smaller than the smallest thing you can imagine, is called the Planck length. And according to quantum physics as we understand it now, nothing can be smaller than the Planck length. Nothing can happen on a scale smaller than the Planck length. So that's one sort of hypothesis, is that if we were in a simulation, it's got a very, very high resolution. And if it's a computer simulation or some kind of matrix, then it would require a computer way, way beyond anything we can even imagine at this point. But again, at this point, I think it's much more of a philosophical question than a scientific one.
Hi. Do you believe that there are universes, multiple universes, and multiple worlds?
What a great and
not just in our Milky Way, but expanding greatly. Do you believe that?
Even in the universe that we know, the universe that we can see, there are 2 trillion galaxies that are like our Milky Way galaxy. Our Milky Way is just one tiny corner of the visible universe. It's 100,000 light years across. Even if you could go the speed of light, it would take 100,000 years to get from one side to the other. And that is just one tiny, tiny, it's 1 out of 2 trillion galaxies. So yes, even in this universe as we know it, there are uncountable worlds. When people use the word multiverse, what they mean is whole other universes, places we cannot go, not because they're too far, but because they're not even in the same space-time with us. They're a completely different universe that might even have different physical laws and that sort of thing. You asked if I believe in them. I try to be scientific in what I accept as true and what I don't accept as true. And when people are that's it. First of all, let me say, I'm not very good at it. Most of us aren't. It's very difficult to live your life in a state of acknowledging the ambiguity that attends all knowledge. All knowledge is conditional. So do I believe that the sun will come up tomorrow? There is so much overwhelming evidence that the sun's going to come up tomorrow that I will bet lots of money on it. But I'm open to evidence that the sun might not come up tomorrow if such evidence were to present itself. So that word belief is a little bit slippery for people who are science oriented generally. Another thing that strikes me about your question, and it is such a great question, because it touches on, this is the Interfaith Council, right? So you're not here because you're all scientists interested in a science lecture. When religious people posit or believe or talk about realms other than the physical, natural reality that we live in, sometimes science-oriented people bring their worst arrogance to the fore and say, well, there's no evidence for that. No, that's superstition, or whatever else rude people say about other religions or religion in general. But because scientific and mathematical evidence is suggesting that there could be, especially questions like what came before the beginning of time, causality doesn't mean much. Cause and effect don't mean much before time. So cosmologists are asking questions like, could there be other universes? Or even, what is the origin of an entire universe? How does that happen? How does that begin before time exists? Those questions are scientific questions, but they too are hypothesizing realms other than this natural physical reality that we live and interact in. And I kind of chuckle a little bit whenever anyone gets dogmatic about questions that we can't really answer at this point. So a question like, is there a heaven? Is there a hell? Was there a universe before time began? The only honest answer that I can give is, I don't know. And I am striving to live my life comfortable with questions whose answer is, I don't know. It's instinctive for human beings to want to know. It's normal and natural for us when we encounter a mystery to come up with some answer to that mystery, some solution. We want to know, or we at least want to be comfortable thinking we know. And I don't know. I just don't know. So when you ask, do I believe? Well, I'm not even sure I can say I believe that the sun is going to come up tomorrow. I trust that it will based on evidence. But there's no evidence for other universes. It's just a question. That was a very long and rambling answer with a lot of tangents. Did I answer the same question you're asking?
That was a yes.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Hi, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom. I was just wondering, the thoughts in my head, if they're just in my head, do they have a physical effect within the world? And does the quality or the positivity or negativity of the thought matter?
Great question.
Yeah, I like that question. Well, it was also two questions, so I'll answer the first part first. I have sleep apnea, and I know that because I had a sleep study done, and they put all this net of electrodes on my head so they could record my brain waves. So the first part of your question, do the thoughts in my head have an effect outside of my skull? Absolutely. You can put sensors out there and measure it. It's very, very small. So does it have an impact on anything else? Probably not measurable, but is there some impact? Absolutely yes. Very small, but there. Do the thoughts, positivity or negativity, matter? In terms of how brain waves go out from your skull and affect the surroundings, again, I think it's probably far too small to measure. So that's a question we probably can't answer. But absolutely, the way you act on those thoughts is going to have very clear, measurable, quantifiable impacts on the world around you. So I encourage people to, pay attention to what you're thinking, because it will sooner or later affect your behavior. And that we know for sure matters.
Okay, we're getting close to the end of our time. This may be one of our last questions.
Oh dear. When years ago, I had a science teacher who was teasing the class and asked a question that I have thought about over the years since then. And she said, everything natural is actually math. Is everything really math? Or is that our brain turning it into math and it has nothing to do with math?
Oh, what a wonderful question. Well, there's a kind of, there has been, I think it's disappearing, I really do. But over the decades, maybe over the centuries, there's been this kind of pecking order in the sciences where, biologists would, well, they wouldn't say it. It's the physicists who would say this. They would say, well, biology all essentially reduces to chemistry, and chemistry all reduces to physics. And then from across the hall, the mathematicians would chime in, yes, but physics all reduces to mathematics. And it's arrogant and not true, at least from my perspective. You need physics. You need math to explain physics. You need physics to explain chemistry. You need chemistry to explain biology. But what's happening now in the scientific community is this new concept called emergence is taking the sciences by storm, because we've spent centuries now taking things apart to see how they work, and then to see how the parts work, and taking those parts apart to see how they work. And this is called reductionism, and it's extremely effective. It has been part and parcel of science for centuries, and it really works, and it's really effective. And now we've gotten to the point where the scientific disciplines have learned enough about the natural world that they overlap with one another. You can't really understand anything without physics and chemistry. You can't understand a machine, or, for example, all these things overlap. You notice some of the papers. If you just do a Google Scholar search for a random scientific paper, and you'll find that most papers, most discoveries are made by teams of 5 to 200 scientists working together. And it's because the cutting edges require these interdisciplinary teams. So we're at the point in the history of science where we're still taking things apart to see how they work, but much more importantly, we're putting things back together. And we're finding that there are emergent properties. We're finding that wholes are greater than the sums of their parts. So by analogy, you could say, and this is kind of like what your teacher was asking about, you could say that a piano or piano music is nothing but hammers hitting strings, right? But if that's your view of the world, if that's your view of music, you're missing something really important, which is the music, right? Music is not nothing but hammers hitting strings. Music arises from hammers hitting strings, but music is something else that arises from nothing but hammers hitting strings. So the music is an emergent property. And we find this with almost everything in the universe. So take a dog, for example. If you think a dog is nothing but a bunch of carbon-based molecules and water interacting with each other, you're never going to get to the part where you play catch with the dog. You're going to miss all the dogness of that complex system. So the dogness, the playfulness, all the things we love about dogs, those are emergent properties of the biology, chemistry, physics, and math that we understand about the dog. But those things are not equivalent to the dog. And the same is true with human beings. The same is true even with simple molecules like water. You can study hydrogen and oxygen all you want, but it's extremely difficult, if not impossible, to predict something like surface tension, given knowledge only of hydrogen atoms and oxygen atoms. The two have to come together to make water molecules, and then you also have to have bulk quantities of them before you get emergent properties like surface tension. So again, a long and rambling answer, and I'm not sure I even remember what your question was at this point. The reductionist process is really important, and we need to keep doing it. But we also now know that we can put things back together and recognize that wholes are greater than the sums of their parts. And no, my being is not reducible to mathematics. It just isn't. There are aspects of me that you cannot get from the mathematics or the physics or the chemistry or the biology or the psychology or the sociology.
Okay, well, JD, it's been amazing to be with you tonight. Thank you so much for coming to Abilene, Texas to speak to us, and we want to give you a round of applause.
Thank you. This has been really fun, and I look forward to being there in person some year. I'm not sure when that's going to be, but my spouse and I are looking towards maybe a year from now or a little after. We want to come south in the wintertime. Who knew?
Okay. JD, I was fortunate enough to be able to hear a podcast interview with you earlier this week. And I know that we also have a copy of a children's book here in the room tonight that you wrote. And I want to just let everyone know that you can take a look at that tonight before you leave if you like. Is there any other things you want to share with us about ways that we can connect with some of your writings or your work or ways to hear you in the future?
Yeah, the best place to start is at my website. And there you can sign up for my monthly newsletter, which people seem to really like. I put a lot of time and effort into it, so it's good to know that they like it. But it's news about my work, but also it's science news. You know, I scrub all the science news, new papers that come out, looking for things that I find particularly profound or insightful. And I just do a quick summary of them and put them in my newsletter. My children's book is available on most internet booksellers, at least. Yeah, I think that's it. There's probably more, but start with my website. There are lots of choices and options there.
Okay, well, JD, we're going to move into another phase of our meeting. We want to share a bit more news with our audience here tonight. You're welcome to stay with us, listen in, and if you have any advice at any point, let us know about how we can be a better interfaith community here in Abilene. We're a small town, but we have all of the major world's religions here in Abilene, and we want to learn whatever we can from people like you about how we can build better community here in Abilene. And I want to turn things over to Tyler, who's going to share a little bit about our cafe conversation events that are coming up this fall and next spring.
I just want to say personally, JD, thank you so much. And thank you, like on behalf of the board, thank you to everyone here. I know since Linda brought it up last fall, we have been so excited to hear from you, JD, and thank y'all for being here to be a part of that. So many questions I gleaned so much from, just at being bombarded with all this information and knowledge from JD. I'm just like, I'm holding on for dear life through part of it. And your questions help me think about things in a new way. So thank you for that. As far as cafe conversations, mark your calendars. October 3rd, a week from Thursday, February 6th, and May 8th. We're going to be ramping up our cafe conversations again. I'm so excited to be able to facilitate that. October 3rd, next Thursday, Dr. Waters will be leading a discussion on theodicy and anti-theodicy, how different faith traditions deal with the problem of evil. I'll leave it at that. That's just a little tease. But I would love to see all of your faces there. We're going to be at Grain Theory in the back room, the Blakely. You're free to grab food, get drinks, coffee, whatever. So that will be next Thursday. And then, of course, February 6th and May 8th, every cafe conversation, Thursday night, 6 o'clock. So, yeah, anyways. 6 o'clock.
Thank y'all, everybody, for coming. We so appreciate seeing all of your faces. Thanks again to the UU Fellowship of Abilene and McMurray University and First Central Presbyterian Church for being our sponsor. And we are hoping that we have a good recording of this, because I know I was seeing all the slides and thinking, how am I going to remember all this? We're going to try to send that recording out to the whole membership. So hopefully many people will get to gather your wisdom, JD. Thank you so much. And we have an email sign-up sheet at the back if you want to find out about our future meetings. And I think that's it. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you, JD, one more time. Bye-bye.